Ladies and gentlemen, this is a updated version, re-edited, for your pleasure, part 1 of my Nirvana series on the last days of Kurt Cobain and how Courtney Love manipulated the media, a cleaner version. I hope you guys enjoy.
There are a lot of magazines that just don't give a shit. They purposely misquote you just to have a funny story, you know, or just to with you, or to, you know, just to sell their magazine, because that's the only reason they're in it.
For most musicians, making the cover of Rolling Stone magazine is the epitome of success. It means you have landed, you have made it, you're on the cover of a Rolling Stone. But for Kurt Cobain back in 1992, he wanted to remain loyal to his true fans. And even though Rolling Stone had taken it upon themselves to buy the entire band suits for the photo shoot of their first cover feature, Kurt Cobain shows up to the photo shoot wearing a white t-shirt in which he wrote, "Corporate magazines still suck." 27 years later, I'm doing research for a video on the tragic end of Kurt Cobain, the last days of his life. And what do I find? A June 1994 article by the same said magazine, Rolling Stone, that has several inconsistencies, things that we now know not to be true. And when we go over this article in this video and talk about the last days of Kurt's life, we're going to then start to realize how people like Courtney Love, Michael Callie DeWitt, Dylan Carlson, Jessica Hooper, Kristen Pfaff were never investigated. And by investigated, I mean they were not even interrogated. They were never questioned.
Who said it was going to be heavier?
I read it in Rolling Stone, maybe.
What would they know?
Even for millennials like myself, it's really hard to think back to a time before I had this vast library of knowledge within my pocket that I could just pull out, cross-reference, fact-check the information that I'm getting from whatever news source I'm watching. And it must be nearly impossible for the younger generation to do so. But if we're going to talk about Kurt Cobain's disdain for the media, we need to think 90s. A time when 95% of people all got their information from the same news outlets, the big corporate ones. If you wanted information on a musician, you went to Spin Magazine, or Rolling Stone magazine, or Hit Parader. Now, there was also this cool underground scene full of fanzines, but typical kids like me who grew up in rural areas, we didn't have record stores where we could get fanzines. Mainly I read Hit Parader because it featured a lot of the heavier bands. If you were lucky enough to live in Seattle, San Francisco, New York City, somewhere like that, you may have got your information from an alternative source. But like I said, 95% of people, we all took it from the same places, and we trusted that they were telling us the truth.
You yourself, do you see things that you said that you are often misquoted a lot in the press?
Constantly.
Pretty.
98% of the time, yeah.
But
not with fanzines usually, because they understand us.
This is a great time for me to say that all of my sources are linked below if you want to fact check. I have in my hand a copy of the June 1994 Rolling Stone article titled Kurt Cobain's Downward Spiral, The Last Days of Nirvana's Leader. You can see that I've taken meticulous notes. We're not going to go over the whole thing because it's rather lengthy, but we are going to hit on some inconsistencies, things that we know now are incorrect, that they published to the whole world. And we're going to come to understand why there was no investigation. The article starts out very basic with some general, true information. On April 8th, shortly before 9 a.m., Kurt Cobain's body was found in a greenhouse above the garage of his Seattle home. Across his chest lay the 20-gauge shotgun with which the 27-year-old singer, guitarist, and songwriter ended his life. And right there in the very first paragraph, second sentence, they've already decided and told you that he ended his own life. No need for any further investigation. Cobain had been missing for 6 days. And this isn't a lie so much as a point I would like to bring up that I don't think anyone else has ever brought up. If you're married to the most famous man on earth, and he was at that time the most famous musician on earth, and you're legitimately concerned about his safety, you think he may be suicidal, why would you go to police and hire a private investigator when you could go to the media? We know that Courtney Love has no problems with reporting her own life's dramas to the media to create buzz and get those cameras in front of her face. She loves attention. Why would she keep this a secret among family, friends, and police? Had she went to the media, and I was a kid, okay? I was a kid when this was going on. I was only 11 and a half years old, and I do not recall anything about Kurt Cobain missing until they found his body. And I have looked and looked and looked for evidence that him being missing was announced to the public. And I can't find anything. It was not announced until after his body was found. If you want to find the most famous man on earth, all you got to do is tell his fans that, hey, we're looking for him. Somebody's going to spot him and go up to him and say, hey, we're concerned about your safety. It may have changed the course of events. But she didn't. She kept it private. And as far as I know, the police kept it private until they found him dead. Now, this is where we come across our first lie. I want to direct your attention to the second paragraph. An electrician installing a security system in the house discovered Cobain dead. His name was Gary Smith, and we're going to be talking about him a little later to point out other lies later in the article. Though the police, a private investigation firm, and friends were on the trail, his body had been lying there for 2.5 days. Now, the last sentence, he was identifiable only by his fingerprints. This is something we now know that Courtney told Rolling Stone, but is false. Perhaps she thought that the death scene pictures would never be released, but we can see by pictures here, and again, I hate looking at them, but to prove a point, and yes, these are reenactment photos, but police have said that the right side of his face was identifiable. There was damage to the left side, and that's why they took pictures. Although this is a reenactment, it was done with pinpoint accuracy. There is a pool of blood off to the left. The shot went through the left, leaving the right side of the face intact. Why Courtney would lie and say they needed his fingerprints is beyond me. There were police officers who arrived who had never met him before, who identified him by his facial features alone. As well, I would like to point out from that paragraph that according to the private investigator Tom Grant, later on, he said that Courtney Love specifically sent the electrician to the home to put up safety lighting, security lighting. This guy, Gary Smith, he worked for Vecca Electricity, VECA. He was specifically told to go to that area of the home to put up this lighting. Was Courtney Love, and this is just pure speculation, was Courtney Love anticipating the discovery of Kurt's body? We know that she loves those cameras. We know that when Kurt's body's found, those cameras are going to be shoved in her face. Was she in such great anticipation that she did not want to wait for the eventual discovery of his body, that she called an electrician to come and put lighting up in this specific area of my home? Gary Smith was the electrician who discovered Kurt's body. However, he is not the one who reported it. A lot of people think he reported it. He did not. He basically called his boss. He called the corporate office and said, hey, we got a problem here. I'm out at this job site. I've found a dead body. I believe it's Kurt Cobain. There's a note with a pen stabbed through it and a planter full of dirt. The co-worker, Bruce Williams, is actually, in fact, Gary Smith's supervisor at Vecca Electric. Williams proceeds to do something that you wouldn't expect after finding a rock star dead in his home. Instead of calling police, called a local radio station and bartered for concert tickets. There are some sick people in this world, man, and there's nothing we can do about that. But I'd like to think that I'm at least a decent enough human. If I found a famous musician dead, I would not call a radio station and barter for concert tickets. He told the DJ it was the scoop of the century and that the DJ owed him lifetime's worth of concert tickets. Only after that were the police contacted. And now I would like to direct your attention to paragraph 4, the very first sentence. Cobain's friends, family, and associates had been worried about his depression and chronic drug use for years. This is another falsity. The only person who ever said Kurt Cobain was extremely depressed to the point even of suicide was Courtney Love. Everyone else at this time said he was quite happy. And I want to point out that there's a difference between depression and dejection. Okay, they're not interchangeable words. Depression is when you are sorrowful, and there doesn't have to be a reason for you to be sad. You're just sad. We all know it's a mental disorder. Some people just can't help it. They just feel sad for prolonged periods of time. And then there's dejection, which means you're depressed, but there's a reason for you to be depressed. And it does not occur for long periods of time. It only happens when things are wrong, when there's actually something to be sad about. And it also means evacuation of the bowels, fecal discharge, which I find kind of ironic, seeing how one of Kurt's first band names was Fecal Matter. This was a man who was unhappy in his marriage. His wife, who he wanted to leave, was threatening to keep his only daughter from him if he didn't do as she commanded. And he wanted to go in a different direction musically, and he was afraid that it would upset his fans. Kurt really truly cared about what his fans thought about him. He wanted to start working with Michael Stipe of REM, chill out, do more melodic type of acoustic work, and I think he was very afraid that his fans would hate him for it. I would have loved it. I loved Nirvana Unplugged. I think I would have loved another acoustic album from Kurt Cobain, and I think you guys would have too. So he had reasons to be upset. Now, it's been reported from bandmates and friends that the only time he would get angry and upset and sad was when Courtney Love was around. And she's the only one who said he was suicidal.
Most people don't realize, but we've proven, and it's an accepted fact now, even with the media, that Courtney was facing a divorce, that Kurt was in the process of leaving Courtney and leaving Seattle when he was found dead.
Also, that time in his life, there was evidence that he was really feeling great. He was looking forward. He had a new baby, and things were looking good. Things were looking up, right?
Everybody but Courtney Love that surrounded Kurt Cobain during that period of time said he was happy and upbeat, including his best friend Dylan Carlson. When I met with him and drove around with him in Seattle, he said Kurt wasn't suicidal. And this is the guy that Kurt hung out with the most up there.
We even find out through an interview with the private investigator Tom Grant that Courtney Love hired, who interviewed Kurt's friends and family, that they all said he was in a good disposition. He was happy, especially when he was around Frances Bean. Courtney's the only one who mentioned that he might be suicidal.